Okay, today's going to be a fun episode. I'm going to try out some new plugins and some old plugins on a drum mix. These are some drums I recorded, probably 20 years ago or so. Done in a big studio, room mics that make it sound like it's in a big studio. But what I'm going to do is show you what to do if you have drums and you don't have a big studio. What are some ways that you can make it sound like you're in a big room? How we can augment some of the sounds, some of the different plugins we can use for compression, for EQ, things like that. I'm going to use some old plugins. I'm going to use some brand new plugins that have just come out. So let's get started. So here we are on the track. I'm going to play from the verse part. You'll hear the basic drum sound. I'm going to go through each individual track. This is the kick drum. This is snare top. I'm going to add the snare bottom. Then the hi-hat is here. Overheads. There's a crash track here and a ride. And then there are some toms that happen. Now I've cleaned the tom tracks. I'm looking over here. Let's see here. I have three tom tracks. So let's find a fill that uses all three, like here. Here we go. Here's another fill. Another fill here that uses all the drums. So those are the toms. And then we have the close room mics. Let's see here that I've muted. Let's see what that sounds like. You can tell it's a pretty big room. And then there's a mono mic here. Let's listen to that. That's kind of center of the drum kit. Microphone really compressed. And then we have the squashed mic here. I'm not really using. I'm going to mute that. I'm going to mute all these mics, the room mics here. We'll pretend like we have a drum kit that has no microphone, no room. So if you're at home and doing this kind of thing. Okay, so what are some of the things that I would do here? My sounds are actually pretty good. I'm going to group the snare tracks here. Let's say snare. So I'm going to group the snare top and bottom. That's what they sound like together. That's a pretty good snare sound. So I'm going to send the actual drums, the snare, the bass drum, the toms to a drum sub. So if you think of it, these are like the actual drums going to a drum sub. I'm going to compress them. Sometimes I'll send the entire drum kit to the drum sub, but I don't usually do that because what ends up happening is that you get a lot of cymbal wash when you start compressing the drum cymbals. And that's a thing that really bugs me. And I'm going to put a compressor on the drum sub. So what compressor am I going to use? Let me pick a plugin out. I'm going to pick out an old school plugin. This is TC Electronics Master X plugin. And I have a drum sub thing. It's a preset I just made. It's the only preset I have for it. It's adding a little bit of compression. It's also adding, I believe, a little bit of expansion too. Without it. Makes it sound a little more exciting. Okay, so that's the Master X there. I'm going to bypass it, and I'm going to put a compressor on the master bus as well. I'm going to use, let's say, a Universal Audio SSL bus compressor. Kind of a standard thing to use. I have one in my rack here that I would use if I was using an outboard compressor. This is going to be the G-Bus, SSL G-Bus compressor here. We're going to go, a typical mix would be use a 4-to-1 ratio. I'm going to use like a slow attack. Then I'm going to get a release time that's kind of in tempo with the song. So let me loop the verse here. So if I loop the verse to the chorus like this, put my loop on, and then just go. Here's without it. With it. About 3 dB of compression. Now, when I start adding other instruments to it, it's going to get more bus compression, right? So I'm going to start with just a little compression. And since we're only going to talk about the drums, we'll deal with it that way. I'd like to take a second to talk to you about this channel. This is actually Rick Beato 2. I've had it since the beginning of my main channel, and many of you are not subscribed. As a matter of fact, 87% of the people that watch this channel regularly are not subscribed. So I encourage you to hit the subscribe button on this channel and on my main channel. This will help me get even more of my dream guests and help continue to grow both channels. Thank you. Once again, we're not compressing the cymbals at all. They're just going straight through to the G bus compressor through the 2 mix. So they're not getting compressed by our drum bus or our drum sub compression, which I'm going to turn on now. Here we go. A little bit too much low end. I'm going to bring the low end down on it because the kick drum's kind of rattling a little bit. Hear those stick drags on the snare bottom there? Well, we can either mute the snare bottom and you won't hear it. Now, one thing I can do with the snare bottom is I can actually compress that. Let's say, oh boy, there's so many plugins here, it's almost impossible. I'm going to use a Waves compressor. I'm going to use an SSL channel strip on here. SSL channel, because a lot of people have it. So I'm going to compress this. I'm going to add a little 7K. That might be a little too rattly. I don't like that, honestly. It sounds a little rattly. I'm just going to use the snare top because the snare top seems to have a lot of power and it has a lot of top end to it. So right there, that actually makes it easier. I'm just going to take the, I'm just going to keep that muted. So I'm just going to take that plugin off right now. Okay, so I'm not even using the snare bottom. But one thing I can do to actually fatten up the snare a little bit more is I could either compress it, I could compress and gate it, or I can add a sample to it. And one of the things that you can do is actually make a MIDI track, which I've done. I made a MIDI drum track using the plugin Trigger, and I created a MIDI notes here using Superior Drums. And I'm using Superior Drums with the, it's called the Progressive Foundry. This is by Forrester Saville, I think, did this one. Here's what it sounds like. This is a drum I picked out. It's actually pretty similar in pitch because this is a Black Beauty. Now this is adding a little bit of room sound here. I'm going to actually increase the room sound. But make overheads a little louder. This is actually kind of in lieu of adding reverb, which I could do too. Our snare sounds great. It really doesn't need that much. I mean, I can compress the snare a little bit here. Let's say I take a good compressor to use on a snare drum. Might be something like a DBX 160, which they make a nice emulation of right here. This might be a little strong. Check it out. Ooh. I'm gonna back off the... So I'm just engaging it a little bit. When the red light goes on, you're engaging the compression. Gives a little more snap. Now, the thing about the bass drum sounds pretty good on its own. It's a little bit, has a little bit of rumble to it. This is a new thing that I just got yesterday. It's called Saturate. It's made by Newfangled Audio, and I just tried it on the bass drum. Check it out. This is without it. It's compressing it and adding a little harmonic distortion to it. If you're listening to it, you're saying, you know, the kick drum's a little bit long. Maybe it needs a gate on it. Okay, so now I'm going to actually bring in an old school plugin here. This is Metric Halo. This is one of the first channel strips, the first channel strip made for Pro Tools. Some people are like, oh, what are you talking about? Believe it or not, a lot of people still use this. Serban Gania is a famous mixer, I understand, still uses a channel strip. I'm going to use the gate on it here. So basically, if I just do this, and this is the release time here, if I want to make it really short, but that's about the right thing. So here's without it. Listen. Tight. To me, that snare is getting a little bit too compressed here. I'm going to back it off a little bit. Now I'm going to bring back the superior drums, so add some ambience on it. I'm going to mute the DBX. Not even sure if it actually needs that DBX. I'm going to do something that's a little less obnoxious. Maybe I'll use something like this. This is old school Bomb Factory thing that comes with Pro Tools. Make a fast release. Slow attack. That's better. Of course, it brings up the background ambience of the cymbals. Okay, so then I could be like, well, maybe I want to gate it a little bit, but I don't want to gate it harshly, just to bring some of the ambience down. So I'm going to copy this plugin down. Now I could really limit it like that, but that chirps a little bit. Let's listen now. Yeah, we gotta lengthen the release. It almost doesn't even need anything because I have that really perfect, clean, superior drum snare. Added with this. I love it having the grace notes in there. I think it sounds way more natural, but that's pretty good drum sound here. I have no EQ on the kick drum. I EQ'd it when I recorded it into Pro Tools, but Okay, so if I were to bring these room mics in, check it out. But a lot of you are not going to have room mics like that, right? So it's like, what do you do to add that room ambience? Well, you can also add just a reverb on the snare and bleed it in on maybe the kick too. So let's say I create a sub here like this. I take this sub, let's see, we're going to put it on the output here, and then the input, let's say bus 3, 4, and then I'm going to have to pick a reverb now. Okay. What's a common one here that some people might have? We could do Valhalla Room. Let's do Bright Room here. Hear what it sounds like in the mix. I'll mute it. I'm gonna label this drum verb, and let me take it from the verse again. I'll turn off that Master X. Right off the. I'm going to adjust the. I'm going to bring up the snare, superior drum snare. Bring down the real snare. If I added a little bit of reverb onto the kick, I'm going to go bus 3, 4. Let's see what it sounds like here. You might think to yourself, well, why did you put a gate on the kick and then you added reverb on the kick? Well, I want to put the kick in the same space. It doesn't necessarily need it. Once you put the bass in, that reverb's going to get soaked up, and you may say, I don't like the sound of reverb on the bass drum, okay, that it actually muddies the bottom end up. But it really depends on what else is going on. Sometimes some reverb on the bass drum actually sounds cool. But I'm gating the kick drum to take out any of the spill from the snare drum. So adding that reverb in actually gives it a little bit more length. Makes it sound like it's in the same room. What happens if I put that reverb on the snare drum from Superior Drums? Listen. Now I'm going to mute the reverb. In. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some reverb to these toms when they come in. So let me find a tom fill. So I'm going to go and just have a little bit of EQ on the toms. I'm just going to blend in some reverb on the toms here. One of the toms really has a lot of bottom end here. Let's see here. This thing is really, that we don't need. That's probably, I'm going to just clean that right now. I'm also going to clean it on these things, that downbeat. I'm going to clean the cymbal spill off the downbeat. I'm going to take the, let's see here. Let's see what this sounds like. Nice. That'll be nice, clean. Listen to the downbeat. Pretty good. Take out everything else. Once you add things to the mix, it's going to start eating up that reverb. You're going to probably want to, you may want to take the bass drum and send it to its own reverb and maybe take a little bit of low end out of it. So you're not really getting the low end of the bass drum in the reverb as much. And you're getting just the attack to kind of still gets the room excited, but you're not getting that woofiness of the reverb on there. But this is a good sounding fake room. So that's a great way to use some simple plugins. I just used a simple reverb. I used some compression on the mix bus, just on the drums, not on the cymbals. And I used some compression on the actual mix, or the drum sub, I used compression. And then the mix bus, I used compression. Not a lot, but enough. And then I'm using reverb, and I'm using that sample from Superior Drums. I mean, there's many other drums. That's just one I picked that I think sounds good with our snare. I could actually tune it to be right in tune with our snare. Listen. They actually sound pretty good together, but I can try other snares. Let's see here. Here's what it sounds. That has way more bottom end. That snare has way more bottom end. So you hear our snare mixed with this. I'm going to mute that. Wow. Let's try a different one here. Let's try the Zildjian one here. No, I'm not nuts about that. Let's see here. You want something that sounds like a metal snare? Now that one I would probably put I would tame the ring on that, because this, if you go to the mixer here and you go to the snare, you can actually put plugins here on in the effects, and I go to dynamics and do frequency gate. There's things you can do there, or you can just put a gate after this, and you can reduce the ring of the snare. So let's say I just do I'm going to do like a fab filter gate, which is a really good gate. Here's without the gate. Here's without the gate. My threshold, I'm hitting this a little too hard. That's why it's going into the red there. A lot of possibilities here with this. So these are just some simple ways. I know you're thinking, that doesn't seem that simple. Simple ways to use a little bit of compression. I'm not even really EQing anything. I'm just taking these sounds that I recorded really well to begin with, but I'm augmenting the snare, which by itself, I could sit here and work with the sound if I wanted to have that snare and make it sound fatter. But since I don't really have rooms, I'm going to use that sample from Superior Drums, use that MIDI trigger to actually give the snare more body and to also excite the reverb. And it doesn't have any spill from the cymbals in it, which is really cool. That's all for now. Leave a comment, hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching.